after I knew, what this issue would be about, I kind of read a little bit more. And on the train here, I was reading a little bit more about the timeline and, what happens in the Kali Yugam. So apparently we're not even into it at all. We have so much more to go. We're just starting. So that was news to me. Yep, that's the exact stat that I saw today, and I was like, oh my God. So this is just the beginning. But something that struck me was people will deviate from spiritual growth, or things will happen which will stunt that spiritual growth or group mentality or collective growth. And that's disheartening to read that, and also validating that, okay, I see this happening a lot.
Unfortunately, in the South Asian community, money is a really big factor for a lot of things. And it's not just how much money you make or how much money you stand to make. It's also just how you present yourself. I don't think I have a single designer bag, but I definitely have walked into rooms being like, oh my God, do I need to have one to feel like I fit in here? And I'm not saying that that's a negative attribute. I think, pursuing wealth or pursuing greatness is a great part of our community. But there's parts of it where I'm like, this doesn't feel like it's serving a higher purpose. It feels kind of demoralizing.
Something that I've been more recently involved in is immigration, the process of being on a visa, not being able to legally work in the country, depending on my dad fully as a family, and getting your green card, not being able to travel. I think it's a very niche issue that only people that go through it really understand. It's just the matter of they were born in India. A lot of them moved here when they were 2 months old, 3 months old, and they've lived here their entire life. But at 21, they're sent back and they're forced to do self-deportation because they can't legally stay in the country. And it is so alienating to feel the struggle while growing up in a bunch of friends that are citizens of America. They've lived here their whole life, and I felt like I was one of them, but I wasn't.
Never before on the history of this planet has the global temperature risen so quickly as it has now, and it's rising at a very alarming rate, to the point where if we don't stop it, we are at the threat of extinction as a human race. And it's essential that we solve this crisis because literally life is depending on it. Already species across the world are going extinct, and if we don't solve it, humanity might be next, unfortunately.
What is chaotic about our time period?
In short, everything. I feel like my existence on a day-to-day basis, I feel like when I see people, they're like, how are you doing? And my initial response is always surviving. There's just so much going on that I cannot process what I'm going through on a daily basis. And it feels, sometimes I feel really guilty about that because I'm I'm living such a privileged life. Why does it feel so traumatic and crazy and hard to navigate?
There's so many problems everywhere you look, whether it's climate change, war, violence, terrorism, and it can be so hard sometimes to hold on to hope when there's so much chaos in the world.
The hyper-individualism that's been kind of condoned today is a huge factor, in my opinion, to why it's so chaotic and broken. Everyone's priorities are different. They're more, of course, looking within. They're not really focused on common goals. If we shift a little bit like that as a whole towards solving these issues and shifting our intention with that, then we can start to see some progress there.
I think it's really interesting that you brought up the whole individuality complex in America. That's the one thing you hear about, one thing you know about America is that Americans put themselves first. When you come from cultures like ours, we're citizens of both worlds, our own cultures growing up, and then we live here, so we're in this flux of what's right, what's the right way to move forward. Individually, I love chaos. I thrive in it and I enjoy it. It's when I feel the most successful is when I have a packed calendar, when I'm running around, when I literally take a breath at the end of the day and I'm like, holy crap. That's when I feel the most fulfilled. From a world perspective, chaos is obviously chaos, but at the same time, I think it's so human. And it is in that chaos that finding the pockets of good, finding the pockets of healing, that makes the good stick out so much more. Obviously, the balances have shifted so much, and there seems to be so much more bad in the world these days, but I think that chaos is always a part of it, and I think that will never go away. It is always going to be this uphill battle to find more good than bad. Hi, my name is Priya Mukherjee. I'm a full-time pharmacist that works in corporate pharma, and I'm also a fashion blogger and content creator.
I'm Saiarchana. I'm a climate change activist and a mental health advocate.
Neha Dharmapuram, and I'm a full-time creative and marketing strategist.
So for music, I started with Indian classical music at the age of 6. I used to sing, of course, for fun, at karaoke parties, all this kind of stuff. But my mom really saw the potential, and she put me into Hindustani classical. That was one aspect of it. And then through school, I did like plays and choir. And then, of course, I got exposed to like pop music, R&B, of course, Bollywood music. And then I grew an interest for actually making my own stuff and, singing covers, posting them online. And I think just through the progression of everything kind of culminating and being added through every step of the journey, now I'm here with all these little elements added along the way, so it's pretty cool.
So I currently serve on the U.S. Youth Advisory Council to United Nations Ocean Decade. So we're a group of young people advocating for climate action. Last year I was involved in a national campaign where we got young people to meet members of Congress in person in DC to advocate for more bills to be passed that align with the United Nations climate change agenda around agriculture, ocean conservation, plastic reduction, and climate justice. And we shared our stories and our personal experiences with climate change with them. One of my goals is I'll be basically building an art exhibit to use art as a voice for young people. So we'll be having young people across the world send us art and poetry about what changes they envision in climate change. And that's a project I do with Turn It Around cards. We've gone to the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Egypt and in Scotland over the past 2 years, meeting the United Nations officials to share the visions of young people as young as 6 years old, basically to make sure that every single person is involved in the climate change conversation. And we've used art as a form to communicate that, because oftentimes when we think about climate change, we think we need to memorize all these fancy terms, but we all have a relationship with the earth. This year I'll be traveling to Dubai for that project.
Fashion was something that I used to not care about. When I was a kid growing up, I just wore whatever. My parents and I would fight about it because they'd be like, wear the new thing, wear something better. And I'd be like, I just don't care. Fast forward to like high school, growing up, adolescence, and I feel like I became hyper aware of my appearance, probably to an even negative standard. I think now I'm really in a different space mentally about fashion. I use it as a tool instead of something to hide behind. I use it to express myself. It's something I really enjoy. Personal style is definitely something that's relatively newer for me. I think I had a journey with fashion where I was just following a lot of trends for a little while, and then as I got older, now I feel I'm more confident in who I am. And I feel like with that translates, I'm more confident in what I want to wear and how I want to express myself to the world. So you don't have to be 100% certain, but taking those steps to just identify your individualism is so important. Personal style, I think, is also really important for the environment. Finding key pieces that work for you, and that will be kind of permanent and immortal in your wardrobe, instead of just being like, I want to follow a trend cycle.
So I was born in India. I moved to California for the first 2 years of my life, and then I moved back to India for 5 years, which I would say is like the most formative and fundamental part of my Indian identity. Came back, moved to Rhode Island, which did not have a brown person in sight. So it was very like stripped away, and I started Kuchipudi at that time, which is what kept me a little bit closer to my culture. And then my parents very quickly were like, we can't raise our kid with no connection to her culture and like that community that our people build, which is why we moved to Dallas. Instantly as I moved, my creative endeavors in singing, dancing, opportunity opened up, and I think I was at the right place at the right time. And now I'm in New York, and I think that's the same thing happening again. I'm at the right place at the right time. Now I'm past just training and just having the opportunity. Now it's like, what else can I do? What's the next big thing?
So I just graduated this past May from college, and I decided, if there's any time that I get to take that opportunity to go full-time into it and see where it goes, it's now. So right now I'm full-time into music and just full steam ahead. This past summer I've been performing and focusing on making music a lot. Over the last, I'd say 1 to 2 months, I've been doing like 10 to 12 shows. Some of them were DJing, some of them were singing, some of them were both. So I really tried to just stay as versatile as possible, because a lot of people have like parties during the summer, different events, different like stage shows. So I just tried to take every opportunity that came my way. So far it's been going well, so I'm just gonna keep, trying to keep up with that momentum.
In terms of like mirroring the individual chaotic nature that we may have, how do you feel like that reflects on the external chaos? Is there a tie between what's going on in here and what's going on out there?
When I'm going through stuff in my personal life, I know like my partner or my parents like really see this like, who is this person kind of version, because I'm just not able to communicate the chaos that I'm feeling on the inside, not able to communicate what I'm dealing with, because at the end of the day, I'm the person in my shoes going through my feelings, and even the closest people in my world don't understand that. So I feel like at least in a like more molecular level, like my own circle definitely sees the impacts in the way I treat them and the way I'm there for them.
If you have enough people in a more negative mindset or looking at certain things in a certain way, that becomes the new status quo or the way things are accepted. And I feel like the whole country is now insecure about the way they look because of these new, beauty standards that are now pushed onto kids from a very young age. Insecurity becomes the new standard of living. It all starts with individuals being affected by this, and it's kind of like this feedback loop where it feeds into the individual problem, and then it becomes this big problem, and then that feeds back into the individual problem. So I definitely think there's a huge connection between what goes on inside each and every one of us and how the problem keeps growing. And I think the only way to address that is for each person to take it upon themselves to explore the ways that they function, how to heal in that way, and maybe then we'll see that ripple effect.
I think kids are exposed to scary things so much younger now. I'm scared to see what the world is going to look like in 20 years from now, because I'm like, if it's going in this direction and there's a lot of people trying to fight, if there's a lot of people that are just silent and quiet and afraid to say anything, or just maybe don't care enough to say anything.
I relate to you a lot on being afraid to have kids one day because of the problems of the world, like climate change, future pandemics, potentially nuclear weapons being put on where we live. They don't want to bring a child into the world that's broken, and there can be a lot of grief and anxiety about the future of the world and thinking about it. But I found a way to basically channel that grief and anxiety into optimism and ambition to help prevent that world from happening.
The issues that we have right now, there's a mental health crisis in America. It's so important to think about who it's affecting: the kids, the people, us, adults, everybody, the working force of America, the elder generations. Everybody's suffering from these influences, but it doesn't always feel like there's a lot of effort or targeting to try and address that. And I feel as far as the collective versus the individual goes, I think it ties into so many bigger things like consumerism in America, insecurities, how they're preyed off of, how they start from a young age on purpose. They know that kids have money, kids are gonna go buy things to feed into their insecurities, to look good at school, to feel good. And it's just a much bigger problem, but it has these smaller pieces, and I think it's important to find what those pieces are so you could tackle them one by one.
Yeah, and I feel this is a little unrelated, but I've been recently having this thought, and I was at 5th grade, all of us are being taught sex ed, but no one is talking about mental health. No one is talking about what being depressed feels like, what being sad feels like, especially for multicultural families. Our culture doesn't talk about it. I had to rip it out of my parents for them to even accept that maybe this is something that's happening to me, and to find ways to help. But if it was brought up to me much earlier and explained to me much earlier, maybe I would have had the gut to say something, or even self-diagnose myself to this is the kind of help I might be needing. We're not moving with what is needed in our community and society. We're kind of just going through emotions that the school education system has set 30 years ago.
Seeing people of my parents' age and even my parents, and the concept of mental health and discussing those things openly isn't as encouraged. Do you guys think that's from a place of fear, they don't want to deal with those things because they find that maybe it's not as important, and there are other priorities? Or do you think it's ignorance about it, they don't even know they have deep-rooted issues or insecurities that affect the way that they live?
I love that question actually, because I feel there is a lot of stigma around mental health, especially in our culture. I feel there's a lot of pressure to be perfect all the time, to become a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer, and if you don't follow one of those paths, somehow you're a failure. This auntie I know, she's a mother of a family, and her dad passed away, but because Indian mothers are supposed to be these pillars of strength, she suffered in silence with mental health. And I think it's so heartbreaking to see how deeply ignored mental health is. I think it's mainly the stigma that drives kind of like the conversation to not be had about mental health. And I think that education about mental health in our culture needs to be intergenerational, not just happening in schools, but also outside of schools for people who are cross generations, including grandmas or grandpas, because there are people who have a lot of deep-rooted issues and have not really given themselves the time and space to process that.
Yeah, I think that my struggles with mental health were so difficult to even voice for a while because they seemed so silly, is the word I would use. I suffer from and have suffered from a lot of anxiety in my life. It's general anxiety, so it doesn't really have a source. Sometimes it'll just be the mood I wake up in. And it's a bit of an oxymoron when I say this or I talk about it because I'm a very extroverted person. I do put myself in a lot of risky situations. I was in theater, I've spoken on stages, I speak in public. So people try to sense that together and they're like, how does she have anxiety? And when I was younger, I had a sort of OCD about it. I would be like, okay, if I do this, then these anxieties won't happen. And it wasn't until I started going to therapy in my adult years that I was able to look back at those situations and be like, that was not right. Like, you're blaming yourself and guilting yourself for having anxiety that is out of your control. And I was lucky that when I presented it to my parents, they didn't belittle me for it, but they definitely didn't understand. They still were like, what are you talking about? It was definitely really hard. It wasn't until I started going to therapy and admitting to myself that this is something I'm struggling with that I was able to find the next steps. And again, it's not like a perfect journey. It's definitely a work in progress, like a lot of things are. But I find my little pockets of solutions, which is like whenever there's a big, scary concept that's on my mind, I just find my pockets of, okay, this is one step I can take. This is the next step I can take. And that helps me just come to a place of feeling some sense of peace.
I think religion was the first thing, obviously. Like, I grew up with it. My family was super traditional back in India. And like growing up in India, I feel like I was just like more culturally rooted and religiously rooted. That's all I knew about it. I had blind faith in it for a long time growing up. And I think it took me a while to be like, okay, like, what is my relationship with this? To me, religion has become more of a cultural thing that I grew up with. Like, I thought about this and I was like, if I'm calling myself not religious, how can I have a Hindu wedding? What kind of wedding would I have? Like, I grew up seeing saris, I grew up seeing the homam and like the pujas, and that's all I hear in my head when I think about weddings. So I kind of have come to this middle ground where it's like Hinduism is culture to me. It is what I grew up with. It is my identity at the core, and it's my family's identity. And I'm like, have come to peace with that. I love going to the temple, but it's not necessarily that like I'm praying to any specific God. It's just like that serenity that I feel when I go to the temple. That's my form of peace. And then in terms of spirituality, I think that I got introduced to that maybe like undergrad. The concept of manifestation and the concept of like doing good, getting good, and like at the core, just believing that the world is set out for your best. Even seeing the best in people, I think that's kind of where I spiritually come in. And I'm still on that journey of figuring out like how much of it comes from like Hindu descent or like how much of it comes just from mesh of cultures that I'm living in. And I'm okay with that. And sometimes I'm like, maybe what I know about Hinduism isn't enough to decide whether I believe in Hinduism or not.
I remember reading about the Mahabharata and about Ramayana and understanding the concept of war. And I realized that that was happening within myself, and I was at war with my own being about whether or not I deserved to exist, whether or not I was enough, whether or not I deserved to be seen and heard. I was the most quiet girl in the back of the classroom. No one heard me, and I didn't have any friends, and I truly felt like I didn't deserve to be heard. It was like I had built up all these walls between myself and the world, but also between myself and my own inner world. And it was like the sense of like double prison. And I think that's where spirituality came in and helped me understand my own inner world more and like break down that wall I built towards myself brick by brick. I think meditation was one of the most powerful ways that I did that. It allowed me to understand my soul more and also get a glimpse of who I was. I studied psychology and I studied the importance of life events and the importance of human connection. And because I grew up being alone, I basically missed out on a lot of kind of like human development skills, including feeling like I belonged and self-esteem. I had to basically be my own teacher and basically tell myself something that was not necessarily being reflected in my external world. It was a challenge being able to tell myself, you are enough, when I was alone every single day.
What would you tell your younger self now?
I was 10 years old. Now I'm 23, and what's interesting is that I feel like I still carry that 10-year-old with me, and it's a constant journey of unlearning and remembering who I truly am. Being able to basically unlearn all these truths can sometimes take time, but if there's anything I would tell my younger self is that she would be so happy where I am right now in life, and that I'm so glad she didn't give up.
So tell me about your mental health journey.
It's definitely a very fluctuating one. I think a lot of people can relate to that. I think something that I've maybe accepted now is there's always going to be something that I need to work through. How I'm gonna get the next big break for myself. Something like that, or wow, like I'm really triggered by this certain thing. Why does this keep coming up? Like something more internal or external. Thankfully, I do have a lot of things that I'm happy about in life, and I think I'm pretty privileged in the way that I've grown up and where I am right now, especially now living at home after graduating. And a lot of my friends, almost all of them, are now moving out and, working in the city. And loneliness is definitely something that I've faced in the past. I think that's something that I think everyone faces at some point. But to me, I think the relationships and connections in my life are extremely important. So loneliness is that much more important to me when it does happen. Again, loneliness is something that kind of creeps up on you. You kind of realize it out of nowhere, and you're just like, damn, like I wish I was, doing something right now with other people. Along with that, kind of paradoxically, I think since the pandemic and since becoming a little more spiritual, I've started to enjoy time alone too a lot more. I think my extrovertedness was a lot more extreme. I think over time, I've also found the benefit of being alone and like being with yourself. Sometimes maybe you need to be by yourself to figure things out and to see that, okay, being with yourself isn't as bad as I thought it was. And then sometimes it really hits you and you need social interaction. So for me, that's been like the duality of it. I just hope over time that when I need social interaction, I'm able to find it more frequently. And then when I need to recharge, I have that opportunity too, so. I would love to see that money-hungry mindset not be the forefront of everyone's main priorities, but from my perspective right now, I think that the structure encourages someone to be very money-hungry, but I hope our generation is the one that kind of breaks down that idea.
There's actually no doubt in my mind that our generation will break down that mindset around materialism being our main goal in life. For example, in capitalism, we focus on the idea that the most amount of products we can produce is the best way to go about living in the world. But that's really destroying all these forests and natural resources. And I think it's important that in order to have an earth that's habitable, we need to shift away from that materialistic perspective and think about other forms of wealth. Climate activist named Isaiah Hernandez talked about ecological wealth, and he said that the form of wealth he wants to pass down to his generation is ecological wealth. The idea that he's going to give an earth that's habitable to the next generation.
That's incredible, and I feel like I need to surround myself with more people like that, because I feel like the more people that meet, that discuss, that pass that down, the stronger that community gets. But as of right now, I don't know if I'm in some kind of New York bubble, but it's what's your name and how much do you make is the first two questions people ask. Even as technically still working in corporate America, I'm not 100% following my passions because of the financial stresses, I don't have the guts to do it, to be frank. But I feel like we're still in that like generational phase where like our parents have such a big influence on the career choices that we make. I'm hoping that the generation after us will have less of an influence and more of an impact in what they do. At least that's what I hope to like push down to my kids. It's not about a certain career, it's about what you want to do, wake up every single morning doing. If you can pay your own bills and like sustain yourself to like a minimal lifestyle, like that's what's important. And like the rest of it is like you have to live with yourself in this job forever. There are some people that can get by like not loving their job and just like look at it as a task, but I feel like it's the people that look at it a little bit further that make the most impact in this world. And I'm hoping that the next generation, because there's more of us in our generation than there were in the previous, I'm hoping that they'll be able to go try something new, go do something with more like emotional impact rather than self-sustenance and like making their own money.
When I think about things like money and wealth, I'm sorry, I think about I have to make a certain amount of money because I have to pay off pharmacy school, I have to do this, I have to do that. And I look at it very logically. And I don't think about ecological wealth. I think even being able to think about the environment to like a bigger degree is a privilege of its own. And I think that's where the problem lies. I think the fact that for you to even care about your future generations, you have to make, it's not even like we can make that impact, right? On an individual scale, that impact to these corporations, like we can't do that alone. So for a lot of us, the individuality comes in because it's like, what I can do is I can work my little 9 to 5, I can go to my office, I can pay my bills, and I can save or consume or participate in capitalism, start my own business. I can do this, and I can make money, and then that's it. And I'm not gonna say that there was only my parents' impact. When I first came to this country, I was 8 months old, but I was still not a citizen here. And my parents were like, we're giving you this life, do what makes you happy. And my parents are a very big fan of the arts. I did theater in high school, like I was that person, and they said, if you wanna pursue something that makes you happy, do it. But know that this is the type of life you could lead. This is what could happen. Like, think of the bills we pay, like think of our struggles. And I learned from that. And it wasn't that they impressed it on me or that they had a negative influence on me. And I'm so grateful for everything my parents taught me. I think the conversation around wealth and the current state of like everything is complicated, especially for generations like us, these second generations who are still building, you know, any sort of generational wealth. And not that we even all have that, right? Like we're still building something. I think conversations around, you know, what you're passing down, it's tough because it's like you're still trying to just make it sometimes.
There's so much privilege when it comes to being able to focus on like activism or environmentalism because like we do live in a very capitalistic society and we literally have to like be able to afford to pay the bills and afford to get food and water and to be alive. And I think there's so many nuances when it comes to like environmental and ecological wealth. And I think that there's no right, like either or type of situation. I think both of them can coexist in a way. I do know people who literally work 9 to 5 corporate jobs and who literally work from like 5 to 9 in activism. And literally their whole day is like working from like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And oftentimes people overwork themselves trying to like afford to pay the bills and also save the world. And I think it's so heartbreaking to see, and I definitely have experienced that myself. I've struggled to like make money through the work that I do, and it's so heartbreaking because I'm trying to save the world, but also it doesn't really save me in a way. I think being able to like acknowledge that intersection between inner sustainability and outer sustainability. How can we sustain ourselves while sustaining the world?
I'm gonna say one thing that does separate us, tying back to the previous conversation, is fear. I think the fear to be vulnerable is heavy in our society. I'm sure a lot of people, when they hear things like this, they start to relate and they feel more comfortable sharing their own experiences. And even having these conversations just with, you know, the people close to me, or, you know, even building up the courage for people to say stuff like this online is such a huge step in the right direction. I think that, tying back to your previous question about how to dissolve fear, I think that vulnerability is a huge, huge step forward, because that makes you feel, at least it makes me feel a little less alone in that fear, and it makes me feel like, okay, we're all kind of going through the same thoughts and feelings, and you know, like, I guess I've never had a unique moment in my life. So yeah, I think vulnerability is a great step in the right direction.
So I suffer from like extreme anxiety as a person. I have so much fear that random things will happen to me, and I'm deeply in therapy for this, but I suffer from anxiety from so many situations that are like unexplainable. I'll be in a train and I'll be like, I feel like this train is suffocating me right now. Just like unexplainable anxieties. If you just break it down sometimes, that really helps, because you can just see a plan in front of you and you can be like, okay, I am terrified about this financial situation. I'm terrified about having kids one day because I don't know if they're gonna have a shoreline in New Jersey, because it'll be wiped away. I'm terrified of XYZ. And then if you look at the steps, like, okay, I can take this one step, I can take this one precaution. It breaks it down and it makes the fear bite-sized instead of this like huge thing that's like shoved down your throat. And I think that that's the best way to look at it for me. How do you guys feel about that?
I don't handle fear well. I like shut it out, do the next good thing, and like try and hope that it makes me feel better. Like the scenario that we were talking about previously, I think my thing, the chaos within that I like put out into the world is like things like I tell people to follow their dreams. I tell them that like they should pursue their creative career and like they should go do it. And yet here I am working corporate jobs, suffering and struggling to make time for my creative stuff. But in an ideal world, I would. The first question when people are like, what do you want to do in 5 years? I'm like, do something I love that also gets me paid is always my answer. So that's fear, right? That's fear that I can't pay my bills, but I also don't want to live a miserable life where I'm working a job that I don't like. But what's the answer?
Yeah, I definitely relate to you when you say that you feel a lot of anxiety. For me, if I think about the main emotion I feel in my life, every single day, it's usually fear. I'm literally studying the problems of the world and what's falling apart in the world. And it seems like every single second of the day, I'm being bombarded by what's falling apart in society. I think when we think about the idea that we live in a chaotic world, it's important that we learn to build a safe space within ourselves. Like I often think, how can I make sure that I don't internalize this chaos to the point where I feel like I'm falling apart as the world is falling apart? So I've found all these like small steps to basically create more peace within myself. I meditate a lot every day. I also do yoga. I spend a lot of time in nature because I'm trying to save the climate. So I try to like spend more time in nature to remind myself what I'm doing and why I'm doing it.
I think so much of religion now, over time, over society's development, is based in fear too. Mm-hmm. Not even only in Hinduism, like I have Muslim friends, I have Christian friends, anyone. There are a lot of different things that if they don't do, they're not deemed worthy of saying I am this religion. And I think everyone's just working in a space of fear that, oh, I have to do this, otherwise God will hate me, and those kind of things. I think that, as you said, like fear is driving so much, even the one thing, religion, that should be that safe space.
So isn't that how we're embodying the problems of our society?
It very much is. I feel like fear drives insecurities. Fear drives individualism. Fear drives comparison between people. Fear drives, I want to retire my parents. How am I going to do that? I want to pay my bills, but I also want to care about the world and the environment. So like, there's obviously no solution.
So do you believe that we're in the Kali Yugam?
I 100% would no doubt believe we're in the Kali Yugam. I think it's heartbreaking to see the amount of destruction that's negative happening.
I guess maybe in the grand scheme of things, this is what needs to happen for us to rebuild as a society eventually. But also, the fact that it's all happening together is very overwhelming at times too, that there's so many different issues arising at the same time. And honestly, like it does feel a little hopeless at times, like where is society heading if this is just the beginning of all of it?
The difference between where I want to be in life and where I want to avoid being in life, a lot of it is money. I think the standard that my parents set is like, we set you up for success from this baseline. You either at least get to this baseline or you do better. Everything has been intertwined with money, and like, I need to do better because my parents did so much for me. And the only way I can show success really in their eyes is making more money or being stable or being able to help them retire.
When I was a child, what kept me going was actually learning about Krishna and Arjuna's conversation. And I remember Krishna urging Arjuna to keep going on in the battle, even though Arjuna felt so much grief being on the battlefield. It basically inspired me to keep going on in life when life felt heavy. And it also helped me continue on now in the activism journey, knowing that it's my dharma to try to create more peace in the world, even though there's so much negative destruction happening. When you do anything that's not your calling, you feel sick to your stomach. Doing what I do now is really the most natural thing I could be doing for my soul. Like I feel it on such a soul level that I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. how the society itself is broken and there's so many broken systems, we also are healing in such a divine and quick way. There's so many revolutions happening in society that we tend to forget about because the news focuses a lot on what's happening that's wrong in the world. But we are healing in so many ways, shapes, and forms. Oftentimes, when we think of destruction, we think about negative destruction, but there's also positive destruction happening. We're destroying different mindsets that are negative. We're destroying paradigms in society that are negative too, and we're shifting as a whole in society, and I think we're definitely going in the right direction. While I think we definitely need to go in the right direction more quickly and solving these problems of the world, we still are healing in a deep and profound way. And it's important to remember that and see that in society.
Everything is always chaotic and insane, but it's okay to be cautiously optimistic, and you should hang on to that feeling. There's nothing wrong with it. And if you're struggling to feel optimism, if you're struggling to find positivity, find yourself, find your energy first. But positivity is never a sign of weakness.
You know, going back to the authenticity kind of thing, I think if everyone functions from a place of authenticity, you know, love for themselves and respect for themselves, I think the world overall will become a better place, kind of that ripple effect that we were talking about before. And something that's personally worked for me is on the days that aren't as, good, or I wake up not feeling good or something happens that shifts my mood. I think taking the time to recalibrate is also extremely important through whatever that is for you. Journaling, meditation, going for a walk, doing something you love. I think recalibrating and taking the time to, fulfill yourself before you're able to give that energy out to other people is also something that I try to stay on top of myself, and I think everyone should do that as well. A lot of times I get lost in where I want to be, the results I want, and I think when I focus on pouring, positive energy into what I do and the action that I take, I feel like that has always rewarded me rather than relying on the mental energy of, I want this result, I want this to happen kind of thing.
Easy to say be fearless, but maybe it just starts with doing one thing that you were afraid to do each day.
Something that I want everyone to know is that they belong in this world. And if you feel like you don't belong, that means you're meant to change the world. Sometimes I feel too soft, and I think that's taught me that perhaps we need to make this world more softer and create more safer spaces for people. I think the best way someone can change the world is to be themselves. We need more diversity, we need more authenticity, we need more vulnerability, because that's what the world needs to heal.